All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Yates. I am the Associate Director of Clinical Data Analytics and Programming at Formation Bio. Today, I'm going to be talking about a strategy for validating GxP-compliant R Shiny applications to enable clinical decision-making. In clinical research, as many of us know, a single miscalculation really has the ability to impact patients' lives. Today, R Shiny applications are increasingly being adopted as a newer technology, and we're beginning to think about, okay, how can we use these apps to make these critical clinical decisions? Anything from dose calculations to endpoint analyses. One of the biggest draws for the adoption of R Shiny is that it's extremely customizable. You can create these dynamic UIs for users to be able to interact with the data, and of course, the open source community surrounding the tool. However, all these advantages that draw people to the tool end up being challenges when we start to think about how we can validate. The methods in our typical validation toolkit, things like double programming and output review, to me, they seem to fall short when tackling something as complicated as an R Shiny application. So it's clear we need a new validation process, but it's not super clear what that entails. In the next 10 minutes, I'll give you guys a high-level overview of how we can start thinking about validating these applications, share some advice, and a bunch of resources you can use to get started. So let's begin with the why behind validation. First and foremost, the consideration here is patient safety and clinical impact. In this context, R Shiny applications serve as a decision support tool for these really critical clinical scenarios. Some examples of a GxP Shiny application could be an app to monitor data quality throughout the course of a trial, or even more critically, an app to detect safety signal and identify risks sooner in a trial. In this context, validation isn't merely a QA measure. It's a fundamental requirement for ensuring patient safety and maintaining the integrity around these really critical clinical decisions. The second consideration here is, of course, regulatory compliance. Specifically, I'm thinking about 21 CFR Part 11 and ICH E9, both which call for documentation around the reliability of electronic records and statistical analyses. Regulators here, they don't just want to know that your Shiny application is working, they want to see the documented evidence of how you're ensuring that it's working. So that means comprehensive testing, validated audit trails, and robust change control processes. During an inspection, you have to demonstrate through this documented evidence that the Shiny apps are performing as intended, and validation can provide the framework necessary to begin to fulfill these regulatory obligations. The last point here really represents an expanded business opportunity. When you're doing validation right, it can accelerate innovation rather than hindering it. And when your validation process is solid and streamlined, you can spend less time firefighting and more time innovating. Your teams can confidently deploy new features, knowing that they have a framework in place to ensure high quality, and audit preparedness becomes routine rather than emergency. While validation is going to require some initial resource investment, it's yielding significant operational efficiencies and is going to, in the end, allow your organization to de-risk innovation in a regulated environment. So for today, there's really three components of validation that I want to cover, and they sort of build on each other. The first, in order to begin even thinking about validating an R Shiny application, you need a foundation of a validated and verified GxP environment, which really at this point seems pretty widely agreed upon in industry. This means that you're validating the installation and any configuration of POSIT teams with the goal of ensuring quality and reproducibility of the environment. For this piece, you're going to need to find a partner in IT at your organization to help with this, and they'll also be able to help with establishing some of the operational tooling, like defining directory structures, access control, version control, and so on. And now at this point, there are a number of vendors on the market who can be contracted to do this work for you. The second foundational piece is some sort of risk-based framework for evaluating the quality of externally developed packages. And this is going to be really critical to unlock the ability to tap into the open source development community surrounding POSIT. Because these packages are open source and developed outside of your organization, the quality of them might be initially unknown. And so it's on us to think about ways that we can begin assessing the quality and the risk associated with these external packages. Ultimately, I think this culminates in the creation of an SOP at your organization. And there is a number of really great resources available now to help you get started thinking about this, including some papers from the FUSE Open Source Technology in Clinical Data Analytics Working Group, and some really great PharmaSeg papers over the years, the last couple of years from the team over at Merck as well. Really great resources to help you get started thinking about this. Some things to consider when assessing a package are how you're going to go about measuring the quality and how can you quantify quality, as well as what the impact of the use case of the package is. And you might want to consider having some stricter quality requirements for these high impact use cases. Ultimately, you're generating documentation to assure the quality of each package, which is definitely doable, but it ends up being a huge endeavor to take on internally. There's also products available to help, such as Ator's OpenVal, which supplies testing and validation documents for hundreds of popular packages, which is something that you can consider when establishing your validation environments. So the last piece that I want to sort of dig into today is an SDLC, which governs how we design, build, and test Shiny applications. And this is going to be a really important document to think about creating internally. I've seen a few published SDLCs. I know Posit has one published about how they are validating internally developed R packages, but we can think about how we can extend that SDLC to also apply to validating GxP-relevant Shiny applications. An SDLC can help ensure quality of a Shiny application, which is much more complicated than a typical R script because of that dynamic and user interaction components. A Shiny app is going to be fundamentally different than a static R script that you run a single time to create a static output. And an SDLC can contain guidance on testing requirements, release management, and maintenance to ensure that there's documented quality of code over time. And when considering what SDLC framework is the right fit for your organization, I would really encourage you to additionally look into GAMP and consider GAMP guidelines as a way to ensure documented quality in a regulated environment. So if you're not familiar, GAMP stands for Good Automated Manufacturing Practices and is a guideline developed by the ISPE. The value here, it's providing a risk-based approach to creating compliant GxP computerized systems within industries like pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and healthcare. GAMP is focused on ensuring that these automated systems are properly developed, they're tested, and they're validated to meet the bar of industry standards and regulatory requirements. So GAMP's whole thing is that its risk-based approach is based on impact and also on complexity. The impact in our case, we can think of it as impact to product quality, to patient safety, and to clinical data integrity. A lot of the use cases that we are thinking about are incredibly high impact. And the other input here is complexity of the system, shown by the categories on the slide here, 1 being the least complex and 5 being the most complex. The argument I'm making here is that Shiny apps can fall under category 5 GAMP software because of their high complexity. Anyone on the call who has written code for a Shiny app can really attest to the complexity and the amount of customization needed to be able to stand up one of these applications. So really the argument I'm making is that by writing our code, we're actually developing software and can follow some of the same best practices as software developers in industry. Typically, an SDLC on its own is going to be focused on delivering functional software efficiently and goes about outlining the stages of software development on the left here, anything from planning and design all the way to implementation, testing, and maintenance. GAMP principles already align really closely with those of an SDLC, but with an added emphasis on creating documentation and artifacts at each of the stages of the SDLC to demonstrate traceability and reproducibility of the system. So what I'm saying here is that if you can additionally consider some of these GAMP principles when drafting your SDLC, you can get closer to a risk-based, validated approach that ensures regulatory compliance and data integrity in these GxP-regulated environments. So I know that was a ton of information. I included a bunch of links to resources that I found really, really helpful when starting my validation journey. There's a number of great resources from Posit out there, from some of the Fuse working groups, as well as some like practical R packages out there that can be leveraged to directly support these validated workflows. I even have a link to GAMP for those of you who are interested. And with that, I'll take any questions that are in the chat. Oh, risk metric is great. So I'm not using risk metric myself, but a lot of the like for the quantification uh purpose, but I've seen it, and a lot of the types of assessments that risk metric is using, we've sort of adopted in our SOP for quantifying sort of like the risk around packages as well. But I think if you're just getting started, looking at risk metric is a great place to start. The question is, who should be the owner of the SOPs? This is a really great question. The SOPs that we developed were owned by us, like the analytics group, but with really a lot of impact from the dev teams, IT, and then also QA, of course. But at this point, the sort of analytics team was the owner of the SOP. Some challenges and lessons. At least our IT team internally wasn't originally familiar with Posit. It's sort of a different, newer technology. And now, you see these companies that are springing up like a Taurus that really their whole deal is like deeply understanding Posit. So one of the initial challenges was having to do a lot of education with the rest of the IT and tech teams around what is Posit, how does it work, sort of getting into the nitty-gritty. When my background is really just in R programming, I didn't even know what was happening under the hood. So I think that was the biggest challenge, was just figuring out the deep technical details around how to implement Posit. For automated testing, yes, Shiny Test 2. We're also using TestThat for some of the automated testing. That automated testing is really the heart and soul of how we are validating apps according to SDLC. We are doing manual testing on top of it, as well as UAT with the stakeholders, making sure that what you're building for whatever team you're working with, that the stakeholders are approving and making sure that it's really fit for purpose. So we are including UAT as a really huge manual testing effort, but I think right now we're sort of doing both. Okay, and Phil's closing the chat. So thank you, everybody.